контексте этих самых процессов, в контексте тех тенденций, которые накапливаются и которые далеко не всегда идут в русле идеалов Организации Объединенных Наций.
But within the framework of UN, we still have a lot of problems to be resolved. Of course, UN have referred to some of the principles, and today we also mention we met with my friend, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we found we have a lot of deep-seated problems. So the context right now is that actually a lot of issues are related to the United States, because for the Western world, actually they're always provocating the single policy, and they are actually restraining Russia. And all of these policies have been lasting for many years. So in order to suppress Russia, Ukraine was actually affected by the Western countries. For example, it will have some impact to the rights of Russians. Also, on the legislative level, they also come up with a lot of regulations and laws. And also, there were many Nazis coming out from this process. And today we talk about these issues. So for President Putin, he also mentioned that for this time, the special military operation, the aim is to protect the civilian. We would like to do that, and we would like to work with our partners from the United Nations, and also we would like to work with the Red Cross Society. We want to relieve the pain from the civilians. And after we built ties with the defense, after the UN built ties with the defense ministry of Russia, so the UN side actually talked with the representative from our defense department, especially on the issue of setting up the humanitarian corridor. So for the UN side, altogether they have 5 rounds of observation on humanitarian issues. Also, they pay attention to civilians from Ukraine and also civilians from Donbas region. For UN, on one hand, they work with the defense ministry and also they work with the intelligence department in Russia. And today, we talk about a lot of the cooperation plans. With today's negotiation, we talk about what efforts could be taken by the Russian side to resolve some of the humanitarian issues. So for our stance, remain the same. Actually, the Western country also put UN at a difficult situation or put UN at a dilemma. We realize some of the proposals coming from Germany or coming from France.
Соединенных Штатов, которые в прошлом году провели саммит демократий, куда приглашения выписывали самостоятельно, ни с кем не советуясь.
For these nations, they always advocate a free diplomatic tie or diplomatic policy. For some countries, they may pose a threat to United Nations, and some of them even want to revise some of the articles for the UN Charter. For the UN Charter have a very clear rule, that is the equality in sovereignty. The headquarters of UN is based in New York. We should never forget that. Before I conclude my short speech, I would like to emphasize we try to understand the positions from different parties. For example, today we have very open and frank conversation with the UN side. I believe with these conversations, we could better understand and review the UN charters. And we will try to think more about how to promote the multilateralism. Once again, I would like to say a big thank you to Mr. Guterres. Thank you for the open dialogue we have today.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, as Secretary General of the United Nations, I came to Moscow as a messenger of peace. My objective and my agenda is strictly linked to save lives and to reduce suffering. I had a very frank discussion with the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and it is clear that there are two different positions on what is happening in Ukraine. According to the Russian Federation, what is taking place is a special military operation with the objectives that were announced. According to the UN, in line with the resolutions passed by the General Assembly, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of its territorial integrity and against the Charter of the United Nations. But it is my deep conviction that the sooner we end this war, the better, for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the Russian Federation, and those far beyond. The United Nations has repeatedly called for ceasefires to protect civilians and to facilitate a political dialogue to reach a solution. So far, that has not been possible. Today, across the Donbass, a violent battle is underway with tremendous death and destruction. Many civilians are being killed, and hundreds of thousands of people are in life-threatening conditions trapped by the conflict. I'm concerned about the repeated reports of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law and possible war crimes, and they require independent investigation for effective accountability. And we urgently need humanitarian corridors that are truly safe and effective and that are respected by all to evacuate civilians and deliver much-needed assistance. To that end, I have proposed the establishment of a humanitarian contact group bringing together the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and the United Nations to look for opportunities for the opening of safe corridors with local cessation of hostilities and to guarantee that they are actually effective. Simultaneously, we recognize that we face a crisis within a crisis in Mariupol. Thousands of civilians are in dire need of life-saving humanitarian assistance and many of evacuation. The United Nations is ready to fully mobilize its human and logistical resources to help save lives in Mariupol. My proposal is for a coordinated work of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Ukraine and Russian Federation forces to enable the safe evacuation of those civilians who want to leave, both inside the Azovstal plan and in the city, in any direction they choose, and to deliver the humanitarian aid required. And this is not just about what is happening in Ukraine, as we are seeing shockwaves around the world. The dramatic acceleration of the increase of the prices for food and energy that was already taking place in the last year are causing enormous suffering to hundreds of millions of the most vulnerable people worldwide. And this comes on top of the shock of the continued COVID-19 pandemic and the uneven access to resources for recovery that particularly penalize developing countries around the world. And so the sooner peace is established, the better for the sake of Ukraine, Russia, and for the world. And it's very important, even in these moments of difficulty, to keep alive the values of multilateralism. We need a world that is multipolar, with multilateral institutions, and those multilateral institutions must abide by the UN Charter and by international law. And abiding by the UN Charter and by international law, recognizing full equality among states, they hopefully will be an instrument that will allow us once again to come together as humankind and address the dramatic challenges we face, from climate change to epidemics and to many others, and in which the only war we should have would be a war of those that put the planet at risk.
Уважаемые коллеги, переходим к вопросам. Пожалуйста, India Today.
So first question is from India Today.
Good afternoon. I am Geeta Mohan from India Today. I have a question each from both the leadership, beginning with the United Nations Secretary General, sir. Mr. Guterres, sir, there are allegations and counter-allegations regarding genocide, war crimes, human shields, as also reports of chemical weapons and biological weapons being used. You spoke about contact group and humanitarian corridors. You also spoke about investigations. Will the United Nations look at independent investigations, creating a team, an investigating team, to look into the facts on the ground? And my question to the Foreign Minister, sir, both sides, whether it's the United Nations or the international community, are looking at negotiated settlement and ceasefire. Should Russia look at a negotiated settlement? Is there a country or an organization that could act as a mediator? Who would Russia consider as a mediating agency? Thank you.
Well, the UN Secretariat has not the power to do investigations of that kind. We have the International Criminal Court, we have the different mechanisms that exist in the human rights system, namely commissions of inquiry. It is not my intention to promote an investigation myself. I have not the authority for it, but I think it's very important to have independent investigations in order to have full credibility and full accountability.
Да, что касается адресованного мне вопроса, я сначала хочу сказать про те позиции, которые
So right now, the international society, they have already speak out their stance and also their stick to the stance. First, we have to abide by the UN Charter because for all the different countries, they are equal in terms of the sovereignty. As the Secretary General said in the UN Assembly, and they may condemn Russia for their aggression, and also they pass a proposal. I would say for this proposal is word to word, and for the U.S. counterparts, they actually taken some actions and force others to vote. Despite of that the situation, this proposal was not passed unanimously. We know some countries against this proposal. And we know for Secretariat of UN, they have the right to reserve their options. So we think the most important thing is to reach consensus through consultation. Because of that, we passed Minsk Agreement in 2015. So actually, that is a direct dialogue from Donetsk, Luhansk. And actually, for the Minsk Agreement, it respects the sovereignty of Ukraine. Actually, Russian side, we abide by this agreement. However, at that time, the former president of Ukraine, I think, first of all, he should have a conversation with these two regions. By doing that, it could ensure the unity of the Ukraine territory. But right now, you could see the DPR and LPR already make their choice. Back in that time, I think maybe UN didn't realize that the Kiev side didn't do well. And actually, I have a very good friendship with Mr. Guterres, but for some issues, we have to resolve those problems. We have to find out the truth. How to resolve those issues? How people survive? We need to find a way to coexist with each other. We need to find out which country keep violating the rules from UN. I understand for different countries they have their own history, their own civilization. We should have our own stance. I firmly believe that in the UN Charter they do realize that. I think the UN Charter will play a key role. I think the most important thing that we have a very frank and open dialogue. So this will be called a very constructive dialogue. However, for our Western counterpart, they want to reinforce their status in the international society. So as for peace talks, for Russian side, we support peace talks, to hold peace talks. Actually, in early March, President Zelensky said we need to have a talk. However, we think for the delegation from Ukraine, they always move backwards. I think for the Ukraine side right now, they are supported by certain countries. They think if they could keep this situation as long as possible and then they will receive some support from other countries, they could receive some weapons from the Western countries. I think if that is the case, we won't have any constructive outcome. As for ceasefire, so actually each day we keep emphasizing the importance of ceasefire. We want to open up more humanitarian corridor.
Нацистских батальонов СС, Waffen-СС, и о которых, кстати, президент Зеленский, отвечая
When we
на
talk
вопрос
about
журналиста CNN, по-моему, сказал, ну, у нас таких много батальонов, они такие, какие они есть.
Denazification, I believe in one speech, President Zelensky said, in Ukraine, they don't have any Nazis.
Предъявлять западному демократическому сообществу человека со всеми его потаенными мыслями.
When he faced with the Western countries, he didn't want to acknowledge the fact that there were any Nazis in Ukraine, and I believe his speech was edited. Actually, in the previous peace talks, we are not satisfied with the position from the Ukraine side. We chose different places to hold the peace talks, in Belarus, in Turkey, etc. So you also talk about the mediators. I think it's too early to discuss this issue. I think for some of the proposals, Russia has drafted those proposals 10 days or even 20 days ago. However, for example, like 1 week later, and for the leaders from Ukraine side, they say they never received those documents.
Respects and abides by all resolutions of the General Assembly and of the Security Council. And today, if I regret something, is that the UN was not allowed to be part of the Normandy format to follow the Minsk agreement and to be able to form a very clear-cut opinion about the failure of the Minsk agreement. On the other hand, I would like to say that I understand that the Russian Federation has many grievances. But the UN Charter foresees a large number of mechanisms in which grievances can be addressed, and namely with the recourse to the International Court of Justice or other mechanisms if all the other ones foreseen in the Charter fail. But there is one thing that is true and obvious, and that no arguments can change. We have not Ukrainian troops in the territory of the Russian Federation, but we have Russian troops in the territory of the Ukrainian Federation.
Это правда.
Yes,
Я
you're right.
подтверждаю.
I can prove that.
Пожалуйста, лента.ру. Добрый день, Валентина Шварцман, лента.ру. Если позволите, у меня
Good
вопрос к
afternoon.
обоим спикерам.
I would like to raise one question to both of you. In the past few days, the UN Assembly is still voting on one decision. That is to whether to cancel the veto right. So what is the opinion from the UN side, and what is the opinion from the Russian side? Any suggestions? And what is the current situation? So what mechanism will be put in place in the United Nations? And also for the proposal submitted to the UN Assembly, it clearly stated that so there's no way to abandon the veto right. I think this issue is quite controversial. For UN, I believe there are many different positions. I think for the Security Council of UN, they have to reach consensus through consultation. We should always avoid conflicts between the member states. But for the US side, even though they said they want to promote the multilateralism, but what they're doing is quite the opposite. And actually, they are representing certain powers, and they didn't respect the developing countries, and especially, we don't see much representation of developing countries in the UN system. For example, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And also US are talking about Brazil and India, and they are actually our partners. So I think during the reform of the UN, it should be democratic. But I think we should not make any reforms on the veto right for the members from the UNSC. For some of the resolution or proposals, they're actually proposed or raised by a small number of Western countries. I think for the UN Security Council, on one hand, they should support the right of veto or the right of absence. I think right now the UNSC is splitting. For example, if one country votes veto and they have to offer explanation. For example, if that is the situation for Russian Federation, we will of course offer an explanation. We would like to state our stance.
If I am able to interpret those that so many years ago created the charter, I believe the reason of the veto was to avoid a situation in which a confrontation among the members of the group of permanent members might lead to another global war. And so the veto was a kind of an element introduced to avoid this kind of danger. It is also true that as time went by, the veto has probably been used too many times, as in many circumstances it's used without vital interests of a country existing. And so I'm very much in favor of a moderate use of the veto, having no illusions about the possibility of changing it. I don't think that it will be possible to have a majority, a two-thirds majority in the General Assembly, with the 5 members agreeing on changing that. But I also believe it's important to enlarge the Security Council and to have a more equitative representation, particularly the country like Africa. Africa is a double victim of colonialism. First of all, because it suffered colonialism itself, and second, because many of the countries only gained independence when the international institutions had already been created. And so Africa is underrepresented in decision-making processes in most of the multilateral institutions. And so I do believe that a stronger representation of developing countries in many areas, from the Bretton Woods institutions to the Security Council, would be an important reform.
Пожалуйста, телевидение Китая.
I would like to invite the Chinese journalist to raise a question. My question is to Lavrov. So how Russia responds to the Ukraine side on the negotiation on the issue of Mariupol? So what actions have been taken by the Russian side? Especially right now, we are seeing the U.S. as providing a lot of weapons to Ukraine side. So I think this is quite a dramatic suggestion from the Ukraine side, and they have communicated with our delegates, and also they talk with the Belarus because they want to hold the peace talk in the airport. I think this is quite dramatic. Because they want to show off in the steel plant in Mariupol. I just mentioned that 10 days ago we already submitted our suggestions. However, President Zelensky did not respond to us. As for the weapons supply to the Ukraine side, actually it's not just United States, but also some other European countries providing weapons to Ukraine. There were many countries offering weapons to Ukraine. So our position is quite clear. For the purpose of the special military operation, it's quite clear that we want to protect the civilians from the Donbas region because for the past 8 years they have suffered from the Ukraine attack. And also we have to think about the Minsk agreement. And right now, for some of the countries, even though they are trying to abide by the Minsk agreement, but at the same time, they're offering weapons to Ukraine. I think at this stage, some of the civilians who are staying in the Donbas region, they have gone through a lot of sufferings. For the Russian-speaking televisions or media were actually affected or suspended in the Donbas region. And right now, actually, the Ukraine side, I think they want to ban Russian forever. I think this kind of mindset have already established in the Ukraine. Even though we have the Minsk agreement, it will not make a change. So for some of the actions, they will actually hurt the rights for certain civilians. And also for the UK, they also pose some of these threats to the Ukraine. Last autumn, we offered a suggestion to NATO and the US, that is, to sign a security agreement with Ukraine side. We want them to abandon the Cold War mentality, but we did not receive any response from US and NATO. So we always focus on the principle of indivisible security. Next question, please. My question is also to Lavrov and also Guterres. So my first question is to the Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Скажите, пожалуйста, означает ли это движение в сторону признания правительства талибов в Кабуле?
Not long ago, I think for the Russian side, they met one of the diplomats from the Taliban government. Does that mean they will recognize the existence of Taliban? The second question, long ago, the president of Iran also also suggesting to set up an inclusive government. So, Mr. Guterres, what is your take on that?
Ряду дипломатов, в том числе российским, нередко отказывают в выдаче визы для участия.
And also we realize that the visa for an ambassador from Russia to US have been rejected from US, and also some of the assets have been frozen in the United States.
Вы призывали США разблокировать афганские активы в целях избежания гуманитарного
Mr. Secretary General,
коллапса.
do you think the US should pay attention to the humanitarian issues in Afghanistan, and what is the current situation for the humanitarian issues?
Движение Талибан это не означает официального дипломатического признания. Мы здесь.
So right now, the Afghanistan already changed some of their representatives in Moscow into the representative from the Taliban government, but that does not mean we recognize that government. Just not long ago, we just have a meeting hosted by China to talk about the Afghanistan issue. I think the most important thing is that we have to make our most diplomatic efforts, and we also need to have the economic and trade cooperation with Afghanistan. For US, NATO, in the past 20 years, they never established any enterprises. But for us, we have 140 companies based in Afghanistan. We could have a very sound cooperation. Actually, we are ready to acknowledge the Afghanistan government, but first of all, they have to honor their words. They need to build a inclusive and the open government. I think for Taliban, they have to take more actions. They need to be more inclusive. Because, first of all, I think they are a political power, so we need to have a constant dialogue with them. And we would like to have this kind of routine dialogue with the Taliban government. And of course, we want to have better communication in the future.
Starting by Afghanistan. We have decided since the very beginning to engage actively with the Taliban. And we have a massive humanitarian operation in Afghanistan. But we recognize that humanitarian aid is not enough. In the absence of cash, in the absence of liquidity in the economy in Afghanistan, the collapse of the economy can have devastating consequences for the people of Afghanistan. So we have been claiming that the international community needs to create the conditions for cash to be injected in the Afghan economy. We have done it ourselves. The UN is bringing by plane banknotes to Afghanistan. We already did about $500 million US. We have been pushing the World Bank in order for the World Bank to disburse amounts that are foreseen in relation to Afghanistan. And we are working together with the Central Bank and the American Treasury to remove the obstacles that still exist in relation to the need to unfreeze the money that is available. And we hope that this will be true for all the countries that have these assets frozen. We believe naturally that we need to do everything for the good of the people in Afghanistan, but we are also engaging with the Taliban very seriously in relation to the inclusivity of the government and inclusivity between men and women, but also inclusivity in order for Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, as it was said, to be fully included in the political process in Afghanistan, on the need for Afghanistan not to be a base for any kind of terrorist activities outside its territory, and of course also to be able to defeat terrorism inside the territory, and on the need to respect a number of fundamental rights. And here there are two questions of great concern to me. One is the possibility of girls to be in school, especially in secondary school and in the university. There was a negative decision recently. I hope it will be overcome quickly. And the second, the right of women to work and to exercise their professions in the country, as it is happening to the UN staff, female UN staff, that is indeed allowed to work at the present moment. On the other hand, we believe that it is very important that all member states, including the Russian Federation, have a normal treatment of their visa requirements. It is essential to have the full participation of all countries into UN procedures, and we will be keeping a very strong position with the host country in order to guarantee that we move swiftly in that direction.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
А вот сейчас ответили вам на него. Это такая у нас есть, у дипломатов такая есть манера.
So I think the second question have not yet been addressed. All right, that's the end of the press conference.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.